So, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be speaking with Jace Boland. Glad to have you on today. I just want to give a quick background for everyone that doesn't really know the situation, and then you can kind of elaborate on it. So, Jace is one of the 9 students from Swarthmore College who was arrested and charged on May 3rd of last year. And this was after a 4-day pro-Palestinian rights encampment at Swarthmore's campus was broken up by, I think it was 20 or 30 police officers or so at the discretion of the school's president. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're facing a year in prison for a trespassing charge, right?
Yeah, it's a third-degree misdemeanor, so the maximum sentence is a year.
Boy. Before we get into exactly what happened, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where'd you grow up? How'd you end up at Swarthmore?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Middletown, Delaware, a little less than an hour out from Swarthmore. I went to a Quaker high school in Wilmington, so that's kind of how I got to know about Swarthmore. There were a couple kids in the years ahead of me that went to Swarthmore, so it was kind of there's somewhat of a relationship there. So that's kind of how I found out about it. Started in the fall of 2023. So I just finished my junior year. And yeah.
And how did you get involved with Students for Justice in Palestine?
Pretty much. So as I said, my freshman year was the fall of 2023. So October 7th happened pretty much a month into my time at college. And as you well know, things on pretty much every campus just exploded, including Swarthmore. So I got involved pretty immediately with the sit-in that was held by not just SJP, but actually a coalition of a lot of different student organizations for a little...
Were they just student organizations at Swarthmore, or were they other schools as well that attended?
Just at Swarthmore, as far as I know. So yeah, right off freshman fall, got involved in the sit-in, and then we had a pretty long-standing encampment in the spring of 2024 that I was also involved in. So kind of just right off the bat, and from there ever since.
And why this encampment, and why at that time? Can you walk me through kind of the planning of the encampment?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Spring 25 encampment was kind of unique. We were one of, I think, very few, if any, schools that had an encampment that spring. And in the very particular Swarthmore context, that encampment was a response to kind of a steady escalation from our administration over that year. So we had that over a month-long encampment in the spring of 2024 that did not result, or it resulted in negotiations which were shut down by the administration. And in a response to the encampment, many students, about 25 students who were identified as being leaders, being involved, ended up with some varying degrees of different disciplinary charges pressed on them by the school. And it was kind of a process that took over a year, actually, for these 25 students, majority of whom were people of color, the kind of targeting that we see in cases like this and kind of across the country. So these 25 students were about to get their sanctions after many, many months of hearings, and really some of them were really frivolous charges in kind of the spring of 2025. And in response to that, SJP launched a sit-in of the lead administrator's office who was responsible for the cases, and that kind of ended after a pretty tense 11-hour standoff is how it was described in the student paper headlines.
Standoff.
And then after that, one of the 25 students who had kind of the most egregious charges brought against them ended up getting suspended for the allegation was that they assaulted a board member by using a bullhorn in their presence. There was no legal foundation for it. It was the first time it had ever happened in the country. Nobody had ever been charged for assault for the use of a bullhorn. Just an entirely fabricated and a case meant to target who they perceived as the leader of SJP at the time. So in response to that, essentially, it was okay, we need a new strategy. We need a new way to approach this. We've tried a lot of different things. We've tried negotiations. They failed, right? We've tried protesting with signs and chanting. That failed. We're just getting disciplinary charges and they're not listening. They're not even considering divestment, right? So kind of the logic going into that encampment was we felt that kind of the most powerful thing that we could do at the time was take space back from the school, particularly when it felt like they were backing us into a corner with kind of these disciplinary charges coming left and right. So it felt like the most powerful thing to do at the time, and also because we hadn't faced a significant amount of police repression in comparison to a lot of the other schools UPenn and Columbia, schools around the country. So we felt like we had relatively more flexibility there. We kind of believed at the time that Swarthmore would stick to their kind of Quaker-ish line and continue that, and not actually, we're not for the police to come disband this encampment. So that was kind of the lead up and what led to this specific encampment. Yeah.
And another thing that I read that was pretty cool is you wrote in the Phoenix that the encampment created, I think you phrased it as a culture of solidarity that otherwise wouldn't have really been possible at Swarthmore. Can you elaborate on that? And like, what were those days actually like in the encampment that developed that culture?
Absolutely. This is this is my favorite question to answer. I'm really nostalgic. But I think particularly because of what I just described about kind of the administration using like various disciplinary charge tactics, it was very obviously part of a broader plan to kind of scare students away from talking about Palestine broadly. And there wasn't really many ways to get around that for a long time. And something about this encampment, particularly after the stakes had been raised, there was a bar of entry. When you were walking in there, you were willing to risk something. You were like, you really cared. You really believed in what you were doing. So you had this kind of baseline sense of solidarity for everyone walking in, because we knew that, there was a risk of doxing. There was a risk of disciplinary charges, which did end up happening. So everyone that walked in there kind of knew that they had something to lose and did it anyway. And that just instantly puts you at a level of trust with other people that, especially when we had been in kind of this like fearful campus climate for so long, was really inspiring. And also, I think simultaneously, we had a lot of people coming from other schools, people with like experience doing different kinds of encampments and stuff like that in Philly, coming and kind of sharing skills with us that we wouldn't necessarily have had otherwise, especially a lot of people that were involved in the Penn encampment and kind of had the lessons learned there. So we had so many people like bringing us food, cooking us dinners, even things that you wouldn't really think of when pitching an encampment, like storing like food storage and like how you like keep the temperatures right on all the food so not everybody gets food poisoning, because that's not something you want going on.
Yeah. How did that work out? How did you handle that?
Yeah, we ended up just, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't super involved in the food storage stuff, but we ended up getting a couple coolers and just like kind of keeping track of everything. We had people bringing us coffee. We had some folks come and like build like walkways through the like when the ground was wet so that we weren't like getting mud everywhere. Just like
That's
really
nice.
like simple levels of care that was like shown between people in like taking care of the space that we were living in together. It's something that you don't get to experience a lot of the time on a college
Yeah,
campus unless you're in
human
this.
decency that we're lacking in today's time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, I want to pivot a little bit to Cisco. Why Cisco specifically? And for anybody that's watching that doesn't know, can you explain what Swarthmore's relationship is with that company specifically?
Absolutely. So Cisco is the largest, I need to remember the exact phrasing, but the largest like networking company in the world. They're a huge multinational like corporation, and Swarthmore's connection to them is that they offer a VPN, like virtual private network services, and like network security, like dual factor authentication. So part of Swarthmore's cybersecurity infrastructure is that every single kind of student, faculty member, staff member that wants to access Swarthmore's like online platforms has to download a Cisco VPN in order to access them and connect to a Cisco VPN in order to access things like our course schedules or applications for housing, things like that. Like the whole like Swarthmore College network infrastructure is channeled through Cisco. Additionally, the dual factor authentication. So anytime you have to sign in and you have to get like a ping to your phone with like a code, all of that is facilitated through Cisco as well. And we don't know the exact numbers of how much money Swarthmore pays for these kind of services or what the contract looks like, but because it's literally ubiquitous on the campus, we know that there's a really significant relationship there, especially in the fact that it's downloaded on every single person's personal device. And Cisco's ties to the genocide in Palestine are pretty acute. So the American Friends Service Committee actually has a great report on this through their Investigate project. But Cisco provides, being like a networking company, provides a variety of different kind of services to both the Israeli military and Israeli police forces. And so the Israeli military in like the active occupation of like new Palestinian territory, the genocide in Gaza, obviously. But then additionally, Israeli police forces to police Palestinians in already occupied territory. So it centralizes their communications for the police, and it also powers AI surveillance technology. Gaza is one of the most surveilled kind of like locations on the planet, and Israel's always like redeveloping AI infrastructure to target Palestinians, and Cisco is a huge player in providing the software and hardware for them to do that.
So what were the demands that Swarthmore just use a competitor to Cisco?
Essentially, yeah. Um, that and there's actually more research being done as to the like specific, because they drop Cisco and then the next day we end up with another tech giant that's equally as bad. Probably not the best. Probably not the
It's
best.
it's like you cut off one head, another one pops up.
Absolutely. So actually right now there's more research being worked on as to like how specifically Swarthmore can extricate itself from Cisco in a way that's not going to just create larger problems, but
Who's doing that
primarily,
research?
yeah. And that research is being done by students and some supportive faculty members, obviously not through the administration. They're not really budging on this at the moment. But yeah, the demand is just first and foremost for them to drop Cisco. And then we can talk about how you're going to do it once you actually agree to do it, is kind of the logic there.
Now I want to pivot a little bit into the school administration statements. The administration, I read that they said that there were masked and unidentified people on campus, and that was the crux of the safety issue. Was that accurate?
Yeah, see, that's a good point. And I've sat with a lot of people trying to like think through what the narrative that they're trying to construct is here. So it was absolutely accurate that there were masked and unidentified people at the encampment. What they failed to mention there is that these people were masked and unidentified because Swarthmore has, I think, nearing 400 surveillance cameras on the, I mean, you know how small that campus is.
Yeah.
Every corner of it is surveilled by, and I've seen some of that security footage. It can see inside your pores. Incredibly advanced surveillance technology that they have had been using, as I mentioned, in the past year to gather data and surveillance on student activists in order to target them and attempt to suspend them, expel them, whatever. So this new kind of action involved everyone being masked and as unidentifiable as possible to circumvent this surveillance technology and to avoid the students facing disciplinary consequences.
Now, I want to bring this up too. The President Smith, she referenced the big chair graffiti where it said that it read "Bomb Tel Aviv" with hearts around Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis. And said that that was core root of her decision to call the police. I guess, how do you respond to that? And do you know who did it?
Yeah, I think for one, I think that it's kind of an outrageous equation to make that someone drew with some markers on an Adirondack chair, and therefore we call, I think it was close to 40 police officers to arrest everyone there, particularly on a college campus where people draw with Sharpies on bathroom stalls all the time, and that doesn't seem to garner a militarized response. They're not exactly, mobilizing 8 local police departments to arrest students for putting up stickers in the bathroom. So where we're drawing the line there, and where drawings on property that can be immediately painted over, as they did, I think within like 48 hours, how that constitutes a threat and how that kind of like validates the use of like actual state violence towards protesters, truly beyond me.
And how do they even determine who did it?
Frankly, I don't know. I just woke up one morning, it was there. I was like, sure, man, people get carried away. People were there together. I was never too pressed about it. I was just like, people do this. Also, like, again, it's a college campus. Like, people draw on things all the time. It's just when it becomes tied to a political protest that all of a sudden it becomes criminal. Something around the campus that it would have been like, oh, those crazy kids, these are 20-year-olds, they're drunk, they're doing whatever. But once it is about Palestine, then it's terrorism, then it's XYZ, XYZ. So I think that double standard is like a really, and this was, the same thing was brought up in actually my like college judiciary hearing as well. And I was like, really, man, you're talking to me about Sharpie drawings on an Adirondack chair that you painted over the next day and saying that's why I should get suspended? Like, this isn't making sense to me. I think that this is about.
Can you prove I did it?
Yeah. And I didn't, frankly, and there's no evidence that I did.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But yeah.
Another thing that I read that was crazy was that you were suspended while you were literally still in the police van.
Yeah.
When and like how did you even learn that?
So what had happened, and I tried to put as much as I could in that article there, but obviously it was a lot of things that happened that day. But so I was actually suspended 2 times. So first was this kind of rule that they have called an interim suspension, which is held in the hands of the vice president of student affairs. And it's kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like, without due process, or they can basically circumvent the usual like hearing process if that one administrator decides that you are a threat to campus safety and immediately suspend you, bar you from the campus, bar you from housing, bar you from food immediately. And that is, in the time that I've been at Swarthmore, I've only ever known that to be used on student protesters. But the first time that it was actually deployed was during the encampment. So various protesters that, again, they were able to identify through both security camera footage, and they could have had administrators acting as human surveillance and taking photos and sending them to our public safety at the time. So I believe by the time we had been arrested, then students had already had those interim suspensions, but they were unable to identify me and my other co-defendant that's a Swarthmore student, Brendan, because we had been masked and been wearing kind of nondescript clothing as, you know, the masked and unidentifiable individuals. That's the only reason I didn't get suspended earlier than I did. So the only time that they were able to identify me and Brendan was when we were processed by the police. So they sent out that interim suspension the second they knew what our identities were, which happened to be when our phones and also our bodies were in police custody. So I actually didn't know that I was suspended until I got out. And I can't remember if I got my phone back or my mom told me, because my mom
And your
got
mom
the
couldn't
email.
even find you, right?
No, for a long time. She eventually did, and she was there when I got out. But she got the email while she was driving. As I said, I'm from Delaware, so she kind of hiked it from, I think, like Wilmington up to Swarthmore when she got a call that I was arrested, and then nobody would give her any more information. Pulled over on the side of the road to read this letter from the conduct administrator. She's on the side of I-5. It says I've been suspended. She's like, I don't even know where he is. How are you getting him from campus? So yeah, so I didn't find out about that suspension until after I was released.
That's insane.
And
And you were processed at Media PD, I think it was,
Yeah.
right? What was the scene like at the station?
At media, well, yeah, the kind
Like,
of
were you getting questioned, interrogated, anything like that?
not really. We were first processed at the Swarthmore station, so they brought us in there and like patted us down again. It's like you didn't get it the first two times. And then they had like a questioning room there where they basically just like asked us identifying information, and that's where I think I mentioned like the vice president that I told you about and our public safety officer were there, which I thought was notable just because I don't know if that's legal. I don't know if that's within their jurisdiction. I don't know if they're allowed to be in the interrogation room. But so that was like the first stage of processing, and then they put us all back in the van, and then they drove us all to media in this very dramatic motorcade. The student video of it, I thought it was crazy while I was in the van, but watching the video, I was like, y'all are doing way too much. Yeah, it took us to media, and then I think that they maybe didn't have the space to process that many people at the Swarthmore station. That's kind of the running theory. So there they like took our mug shots, fingerprinted us, and then eventually and gave us our belongings back. Notably, all of our keffiyehs were missing from the belongings, and yeah, no answer as to what they did with them, where they were, and then released us from there. And the scene was there was, I mean, a massive amount of like Swarthmore students and faculty and supporters, people that had been at the encampment but had left and come back, kind of out there. It was a really beautiful experience to come out to. Like everyone started cheering when we would walk out. They had been like, and we knew that they had been following us, that they had like tracked us from Swarthmore to media. So that was really inspiring. It's just a lot of cops standing at the back of the station guarding something.
And you were suspended in the fall semester, right?
I was, yeah. So that came later.
Got it.
Yeah.
And I think you also mentioned in that article or your op-ed that your summer research fellowship funding was revoked, and you said that you spent weeks couch surfing. I guess, what did that summer look like for you?
Yeah. It was a little tumultuous.
I bet.
So at first, so I got that interim suspension letter in the van, and it said that I had to clear out my dorm by I think noon of that day. I don't know the exact time that I was released from police custody, but I'm like 99% sure I was still in the parking lot of the media police station at noon that day. There was no physical way for me to have cleared out everything I owned from my dorm room by then. So I ended up going back later, just having my roommate help me clear everything out. I had a friend that was living in the town at the time, so I stayed with them for a couple days, and then a bunch of the a lot of the other students that had faced interim suspension were also like financially independent or low income students. So we had a group of alumni actually fundraise and rent us a house in Philly for like 2 weeks. So we all ended up staying there together, which was a really, really nice kind of thing to not have to worry about for that time. And then luckily I'd actually already signed a lease for the summer. So I went straight from the kind of like alumni funded housing to that one, signed a lease thinking that I was going to have this summer funding income, which I did not, and then ended up just kind of job searching for a while and ended up working in an ice cream shop. So it worked out all right, but it was definitely that 2-week period.
Yeah, that sucks. And right now you're preparing for finals, I assume?
Just finished my finals, actually.
So I guess you were preparing for finals and a criminal trial at the exact same time.
Yeah. So it'd be
How the
class,
hell did you manage your day?
meeting, very little sleep, frankly. I wouldn't recommend it, but I am grateful that at least, no matter what happens, and I think we have a really strong legal team, and I have high hopes for the trial, but I am glad that no matter what, it'll be over this summer and I don't have to do this in school at the same time. I think more it's a really difficult to describe experience to be attending and trying to like achieve well or get good grades from a school that's simultaneously prosecuting you. I think it's more beyond the time thing. It's just difficult to want to devote any time or energy to a place that's like actively working against me and 8 other people.
And most people can't even comprehend that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And last week, I don't know if you saw, but Doug from DSA, he tried to bring some awareness to your case to the county council. It was kind of insane to me. Council Chair Womack didn't really even care or bother to engage, and instead he just kind of pivoted to Officers Week remarks.
Mm.
What's your read kind of on Delco officials' silence on this? Have any sort of local elected officials reached out, either privately or publicly?
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. I actually went to that county council meeting. I wasn't able to speak because I'm not a resident of Delco, but went with Doug and some other Swarthmore students to kind of see what they had to say. I also thought it was kind of crazy that they went back to make a correction about Correctional Officers Week when we were talking about a criminal trial.
Doug was standing right there waiting for a response, and he pivots to Officers Week.
Yeah, I don't know how those council meetings usually worked, but that seems wildly out of touch.
Tone deaf, yeah, it was
Frankly.
ridiculous.
I was like, man, is it always like this? But in terms of officials, we haven't had any like local officials reach out to us. We had a couple folks go talk to uh the Swarthmore Borough Council when they were having their meeting. The like town of Swarthmore has been relatively supportive, and we recently had a conversation, or we've been in trying to get in touch with some local officials, like representatives and such, but we haven't had any reach out to us.
Got it. And I know you touched on Penn's 2024 encampment a little bit, where it was bigger and they only got civil citations because of Larry Krasner. Now, Delco's DA, Jack Stolzheimer, he's taking a completely different path and choice so far. What do Delco voters and just Delco residents kind of need to know about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And frankly, at some point, and you might have a better kind of read on this, but at some point, the DA position changed hands from Stolzheimer to Tanner Rouse over the course of like since we've been arrested. So I know that Stolzheimer was the DA at the time, but then at some point it transitioned into Tanner Rouse's hands. And I think from what I've heard, or yeah, because Tanner Rouse, and we actually ran into him in Swarthmore the other day, me and a friend of mine, and just ended up talking to him about the case. He did not know who I was or that I was one of the defendants, which was, I'm sure my photo's not out there, but it was kind of a funny experience. And he gave kind of this very roundabout answer about like follow through, um, and about how they started these charges and so they have to finish them. And frankly, especially for a ostensibly progressive Democratic DA, I don't understand why understand it like a understanding of right and wrong or any kind of like understanding that this is a political trial and Swarthmore is kind of weaponizing the Delco legal system to fight out their own battles because they don't want to listen to their students, and why that wouldn't be on the mind of a ostensibly progressive district attorney. I couldn't tell you. And frankly, that's something that I would be concerned about in terms of like elections more broadly. And also the fact that there's been a significant amount of like backlash for this. There's going to be more in the future, like phone banking and like calling of the district attorney. But previously, especially with Stolzheimer, there was a lot of kind of outreach to him from his constituency in, I mean, as far as I know, overwhelming kind of condemnation of this whole case, or at the very least, even if not from a political angle, just recognizing how gratuitous and kind of absurd it is to be pursuing this case. So I would also be relatively concerned about the fact that public opinion is not in favor of this case, and somehow, county resources are still being wasted on pursuing it, the way that I see it. And also, Stolzheimer there was an alumni that emailed him, gave a really, maybe terse is the right word, response to this a lady that had emailed him about dropping the charges, basically being like, know what you're talking about before you speak to me next time. Like, really sassy in a way that I don't think an elected official should be responding to their constituents.
No, that's absurd.
I I want to see if I can find the exact wording of that at some point. I don't have it on hand, but it might have been SJP might have posted it. Now I
And
can
that came from him directly or his office?
yeah, from him directly.
Wow.
Like a really sassy email that seemed really unprofessional to me. But that's my thoughts on the district attorney's handling of this whole thing.
Cool. And before we wrap it up, I want to touch again on what you mentioned before, and your attorney has touched on it as well. That your attorney said that or suggested that the college may have kind of acted partly as a signal of compliance to the Trump administration on campus protests. I guess, can you just explain further on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that so in the beginning or at the end of last summer, and kind of the start of this suspicion, President Valerie Smith sent out an email to the whole school in celebration of Trump's HB1 bill, which famously expanded like ICE militarization to never before seen levels. I can't even. It was a widely condemned bill. There was some absolutely insane moves being made in there. Classic Trump stuff. And Valerie Smith sent out an email to the entire campus community celebrating it because it gave them a $20 million tax cut on their endowment, on endowments for institutions of a particular size, Swarthmore being one of them, and proudly kind of stated that they had lobbied for that with the Trump administration. She's like, thanks to all our hard work and lobbying, we have this tax cut that we can now use to better the community. So we started out the past school year with her celebrating a Trump bill that expanded ICE to be I don't want to use superlatives that I don't quite have the citation for, but one of the largest military forces on the planet. So that's where we started. And so going from that to seeing kind of progressively how, I mean, under the Biden administration, we had that sit-in that lasted over 2 weeks. We had the encampment that lasted over a month. And now this year, all of a sudden, you're calling police to attack the exact same formation. And it's also, you see kind of the new use of this outside agitator narrative that they had never used prior, even though there were massive amounts of people that were not Swarthmore students attending the spring 2024 encampment. Arguably many more, like Philly Jewish Voice for Peace was hosting events there. There was a lot more kind of intermingling between Swarthmore and non-Swarthmore students. That didn't raise concern. All of a sudden, now we have a new administration. Now you have to call the police. Now we're violent. Now we're terrorists. Now we're whatever. So I think 1 + 1 = 2 kind of in this situation. But I would also throw in that we have a remarkably Zionist kind of leadership of our board of managers that I suspect are increasingly pressuring the college to crack down on anything pro-Palestine as well. But definitely Biden administration response, Trump administration response, it's black and white,
Yeah, and the situation is definitely escalating, not cooling. What's your read kind of on where the movement is at the moment? Not specifically at Swarthmore, but just in general.
In general. That's a good question. That's a big question. Frankly, I think we're at a place where people are reassessing. I mean, we are coming up on 3 years into this phase of the genocide, and it's really achieved, especially, we have a new war of aggression on Iran, or continued, I guess, but a really unprecedented phase of it. We have Israel reaching kind of absolutely absurd levels of boldness in advancing in southern Lebanon, and taking up as much territory as possible. So you're seeing increased aggression and escalation on the side of kind of the United States, on the side of Israel, and a decrease in response from the movement in the United States. And I think that that's something that has been really discouraging. It seems like Gaza, or, the increasing attacks in the West Bank, especially during Ramadan this year, and, a new war that's being carried out with the least justification of any war in my memory in the United States. And I think that it's reached a point of kind of normalization where people are like, all right, we went out in the streets, we protested, we boycotted, and it keeps going. And there's kind of, I think we're in a moment of defeatism. And I think it's really important, and especially for me, something I've been trying to keep my mind on in this trial is that we have to find different ways to win. Not winning is not an option. And I think I have hopes for this summer, at least, that more people will kind of pay attention, whether it be through, concerns about attacks on free speech that kind of leads you down the logical route. All right, why is this free speech being attacked? It's because it's about Palestine. I think that also there's really promising kind of upsurges in people resisting ICE, and kind of ICE kidnappings of your next door neighbors is bound to radicalize anybody. So I think I'm also, while it's devastating that it's increasing, I think I'm hopeful that people will kind of band together about it. But I think we're in a moment where we need to reassess. We need to try new things. We need to not allow ourselves to think that any of this is normal, and we need to keep fighting.
Yeah, I mean, and the policing of protesters on campus and the policing of immigrants around the country, it goes hand in hand. It's just
Absolutely.
policing. Awesome. Well, we have been speaking with Jace Boland. Jace, it was great speaking with you. Before we wrap it up, though, your trial is set for June 29th. What's the single most useful thing someone listening can do right now for you?
Yeah, great question. If people are available to come show out for court support on June 29th, that would be absolutely incredible. If people are not able to do that physically, then calling the Swarthmore College administration. If you go onto the Swarthmore SJP Instagram, there will be the phone numbers of those administrators, our president, Valerie Smith, particularly, and calling them, basically asking them to drop the charges. Takes 5 minutes. Anything you can do to put that pressure on them is greatly appreciated. And thank you so
Is the
much.
petition completed, or is that still
Yes,
going?
absolutely. The petition is still ongoing.
Okay, cool.
I think
I'll
I
put that
understand.
petition in the description. So if everyone, like, if you can't go to the trial on June 29th, if you could just please go sign that would be fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Awesome, Jace. It was nice speaking with you.
You too. Thanks so much, Nick. Take care.